Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Vale of Glamorgan Council's Cabinet meeting of the 18th of January 2024. I'm Councillor Liz Burnett and I'm chair of this meeting as the leader of the Vale of Glamorgan Council and Cabinet member for Performance and Resources. We will again be using the Council's hybrid platform, and so just a few reminders for us that the meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and it will be uploaded to Vale of Glamorgan Council's website as soon as is practicable after the meeting. And secondly, if I could ask all participants to please ensure that if participating in person in the chamber, that their microphone is not activated, or for those joining virtually to mute themselves when not speaking to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. If anyone wishes to speak, if they could activate their respective request to speak function or use the raise hand function if attending remotely. All debate should be raised verbally and not via the chat function. That's not usually an issue for us, but that's for the sake of the recording. The chat function is used solely to highlight any technical issues and or potentially to get the attention of either myself or the Democratic Services Officer. So that's with the housekeeping complete, and then moving on to the agenda proper. Agenda item 1 is apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Perks, who is on Council Bill Business Elsewhere. Did think Councillor Brooks, but you've hot-footed it back from Aberthaw, where you've been meeting with the is it Under Secretary of State for Wales?
The Under Secretary of State for Wales.
Yeah. So we're nearly all here, and so next item is to receive declarations of interest, and if there are any, which I don't think there are, the nature of such interests. Have we got any declarations today?
And there were no declarations of interest received this meeting, Leader. Thank you.
Excellent. So moving on to my reports, which is agenda item 3. And the first one is the initial budget 2024 to 2025 and the medium-term financial plan 2024 to 25 to 2028-29 and the overall proposals for consultation. I won't go through it in huge detail, but I will take you through the report because I think it's very complex as we go through. This has actually come to Cabinet and to scrutiny committees, etc., on a number of occasions. And Cabinet actually agreed the financial strategy for the 2024-25 budget and the medium-term financial plan back in July in 2023. And it set out the principles for the development of financial plans, which were revised in November, along with the approach and the timetable for setting the budget in March. And this is the next stage on that. If you have a look at paragraph 1.2, the underlying principles for this plan are listed. And at the end of the day, why are we doing this? We're doing it because we want to deliver the corporate plan objectives, and that's a 5-year corporate plan. We're dealing with year 5 of the corporate plan. We repeat again that we have a focus on supporting the most vulnerable in our communities, and that means that we have that we do focus on supporting social care and education. We need to make sure that our finances are sustainable and that we, and certainly over the medium term, that we have an appropriate level of reserves. So we are prudent with reserves, but we align our use of them with the Council's key risks. The proposals are in line with generating local tax revenue And so in terms of a council tax strategy and how we use that subject to policy decision. Fees and charges, where we look to, in some cases, subsidise some fees and charges that fit with our corporate objectives, but where we are looking at non-statutory services, we would be looking at full cost recovery. A recognition that there is a collective responsibility of this council to manage the finances. So this is not just the preferences of a couple of individuals. It is a collective responsibility, and that those finances should be accessible and transparent. And finally, we would seek to deliver best value where we use what are finite resources as efficiently as possible. So the background for this today is actually, if we look back to the autumn statement from the UK government back in November of last year. And we know there's been persistent inflation, rising interest rates, and no growth. And that's not a comfortable position from which to set a budget. Inflation peaked at over 11% in October 2022, and it was forecast to ease. That's not happening as fast as would be expected, and indeed more bad news yesterday. Interest rates similarly are at a high, and they are not coming down. Despite the economic conditions, there has been significant wage growth, which in itself creates challenges for a large employer. But the significant wage growth actually did provide some headroom for the Chancellor, but disappointingly, in the autumn statement, there was no funding directed to the public sector, which includes health and local government, which cause further challenges for us. The Welsh settlement was published in December, on the 19th of December of last year. And while the Welsh Government budget has increased by 2.1%, as usual, Welsh Government have given more to local government than they received, but that still for us was only 3.1%. So in essence, that still means a real terms reduction in expenditure. If you look at paragraph 1.9, you can have a look at the SSA, the Standard Spending Assessment, as laid out for the different levels of services. And I think if you look at page 6 in the report, which I think would probably be quite an eye-opener to many people, is where our money is spent. And in that, you'll see that virtually 3/4 of the council's budget is spent on schools and social services, and that includes central education and school transport costs, which are growing exponentially. That in itself has major implications for us, because if we're seeking to protect social care and health, social care and education, then any cost savings have to come out of the other 25%, and there are implications for that. There is a fairly brief review of the survey that the council recently undertook in terms of life in the Vale, and there'll be a further report and more comprehensive report on that going forward. But if you look at paragraph 1.20 and 1.21, it demonstrates that the cost of living is a significant issue, and that over 60% of the respondents to the survey had purposefully not put their heating on in the last 6 months. and only 44% said that they could pay an unexpected but necessary payment of £850. So for many, if their central heating boiler or something broke, they would not be able to fix it. Residents were asked about their priorities and to rank their importance. And the top priority for 42% of the population was easily accessible care and health care. And for us, prioritising social care, I think it reflects the concerns of our population. 78% of respondents actually ranked that in their top 3 priorities. And the second priority was the ability to buy or rent a good quality home. And again, in terms of what we're seeking to do with our housing plans, would seem to support that. Looking on to section 2, the overview of the current financial position and funding gap, you'll see that the total pressures, we'll come on to it later, because we sort of, once we'd adjusted the pressures we were seeing, we got them down to a level of about, just under 21 million. They were a lot higher than that. And looking at the funding potentially that we could have coming in, total additional funding is slightly over 13 million, which leaves us still with an overall gap in terms of funding of 7.8 million, or just over 7.8 million. And laid out from paragraph 2.5 onwards is actually the review of the funding assumptions, so where our funding comes from. Some of the assumptions that we're making in terms of funding coming in from Welsh Government, etc. And it also says that currently we are modelling on a 6.7% increase in council tax for 2024-25, and then in line with funding 3.9% for the future years of the medium-term financial plan. There have been some discussions about that, and I'll go into that slightly later. There's always conversation about using reserves. We ought to use reserves for various purposes, and we do indeed use reserves. We use them to cover eventualities. We also use them for smoothing, where we think that there are blips in expenditure, and we use them to deliver our corporate plan. We put funding aside. So in the section from 2.11 onwards, it talks about the use of smoothing reserves there. 2.13 talks about the review of the pressures. And as I said, originally the council had nearly £38 million of underlying pressures and had to take a comprehensive exercise to actually decide which ones of those could be included in this year's budget, or in the 2024-25 budget. First of all, investment. There were a lot of calls for investment. And those are things that we need to do to develop services. The proposals that we're taking forward are confined to new resources for autism provision at 2 sites, and also further Welsh immersion provision at Ysgol Gwaun and Nant, albeit the investment for the Welsh immersion site is less than that initially sought and desired. We've had to cut our cloth, so to speak. Demography, additional residents, additional needs, complexity of needs, they have all added to the additional pressures. Inflation, whether that's pay inflation, pay awards, etc. Prices, we talk about, the fact that we have exactly the same cost increases on things that our residents do. There is a small sum in there for capital financing, that when we're seeking to deliver capital programmes, if we have to borrow, that borrowing has a cost that comes into our revenue budget. So we actually keep our capital programme tightly managed to keep external borrowing to a minimum. And then other pressures amount to about 4 million, and that's less than half of the underlying pressures coming through. That's deals on additional learning needs, etc., and the number or the pressure on the numbers of children looked after means that extra resources are required. So when I mentioned earlier that you know the funding that we needed versus the money that we had coming in, that we were short, and if you look at paragraph 2.22 on page 12, then that actually lays out how we're seeking to achieve savings going forward and meet that target. The financial strategy, if you have a look at that, we have both tactical and transformational themes. In terms of tactical, it's what you might expect is that we will be seeking to achieve demand management, actually help to reduce demand on our services, and also reduce the demand by early interventions. We'll be looking at strategies for generating income, be looking at our services in terms of how we can do things more effectively. We'll be looking at how we work with the wider community, how we use digital services. We'll be looking at how we deal with our properties, and can we reduce the amount of properties that we currently use, but how can we use them more effectively as well? And we'll be looking at how we can use our workforce to best effect. And I will say at this point is that we will be looking to, in amongst the service review and redesign, use our workforce to the best outcomes we can achieve. That is not put in there as a workforce reduction as a tactical measure. It's best use of workforce. And we're looking in terms of the new structure that we've got, we're looking at contract review. Are our contracts most effective? And is our procurement system as effective as it could be? So I said we'll be looking to address savings of 7.8+ million on that. I'll go into transformation themes separately because we actually do have a separate report at agenda item 5 in terms of the next phase of transformation. So I won't repeat myself on there. So tactical savings are laid out at section 2.26 onwards. And I think I would imagine that Councillor Brooks is going to want to say something. If you look at paragraph 2.29, we were looking at tactical savings in excess of 7 million. And they are laid out in one of the appendices. But some of them were just not acceptable. And one of those was which was not acceptable, was the potential reduction in supported non-commercial bus routes. This council puts in hundreds of thousands of pounds into bus services that would not run otherwise. Bronwyn can talk about that a bit more, but the current decision of Cabinet is that the savings will be reduced, and that is why there was a 0.5% increase in the proposed council tax rise, because we feel that supported buses are so important. What the discussion on that will be in scrutiny committees will be, we will be interested. Our view is that they are crucially important. Transformation, as I said, is a separate report. And the transformation saving summary is at paragraph 3.4 on page 14. In terms of growth from the council, that is actually laid out 2.49, and there's been quite a shift in terms of proposed council spending. And as you might imagine, the budgets for schools and social services have the greatest growth. Schools this year, not as high as last year, but they're an increase of just under 5%. And the spend on social services will see just over a 13% increase. There's a paragraph, or there's an appendix on proposed fees and charges. That's predominantly in line with inflation, to ensure that costs are fully recovered. I would say actually that we don't always fully recover our costs, but there will be a full discussion of that, no doubt, at scrutiny going forward. And as I mentioned, page 18, paragraph 2.63 is the summary of reserves and the proposed movements in those reserves going forward over the coming 5 years. They are projected to reduce by just over 14 million in the next 5 years. But if you actually look, they're going down by about 8 million this year in terms of, if you look at it on the homelessness and housing reserve, that reserve goes down from 4.2 million down to 2.5 million. The capital reserve goes from 4.6 million down to 1.2 million. And that's because the money is there ready to build things for capital projects. Although the general fund remains stable as is recommended in terms of financial management. The timetable for budget setting is that there will be consultation on budget proposals going forward from tomorrow in terms of community and partners, including trade unions and the Public Service Board. In February, it will be going to scrutiny committees. On the 16th of February, there will be the consultation on the budget proposals close. And on the 29th of February, the draft budget proposals will come back to Cabinet. At the end of February, early March, we will get the final details of the final grant settlement from Welsh Government, and then the budget will go to Council for debate on the 6th of March. I hope that in the intervening period, that as many people as are able will have a full input into that. I've recently been contacted by a young person that wants to know more about it. And so I'm hoping to have a conversation with them and would be really interested to know what their thoughts are on this. And hopefully we can have as many of those conversations to see, if people's priorities match with ours and whether or not there's any thoughts that we've potentially missed. So there are quite a lot of appendices which we will go through in scrutiny. So you've got the cost pressures review, then you've got savings proposals, which is quite large. Then you go into the fees and charges. I'm trying to get through those. Lots of fees and charges. I think these are all yours, Mark. I think they are, yes.
Troublemakers.
Yeah, they are. Hang on, there is one more type apart from fees. I know it is because I was. That's right. And then, yes, it is. And then Appendix D, that's the final one, is the detailed reserves and analysis. So before I go on to the recommendations, did you want to come in, Bronwyn?
I would, Leader, if that's okay. I think it's really worth emphasising about our supported bus service funding. We fully recognise the lifeline that this funding gives to our residents in the Vale. And obviously we're facing some incredibly difficult choices. And lots of in-depth and conversations around what we can do, what we can't do, what would be our red lines, so to speak, and how we can protect our services the best that we can. Because the trouble is this year is the result of over 10 years of austerity, where we've had to make savings and cuts year in, year out. Yeah. So we are left with literally our red line, really. We're at that very point. And it's really difficult, really difficult. And because we take that responsibility very strongly, as we should, as a responsible council, we have to consider our decisions very, very carefully. So we had an in-depth conversation about our supported bus services and how important, how vital they are to our communities. And so that we came forward with that proposal then about, because obviously it's £470 million a year, that's what we put in.
470,000.
Sorry, 470,000, 470 million. We'd have buses everywhere, wouldn't we? Sorry, 470,000. I think Paul Mack nearly fell off his chair over there. £70,000 a year of council funds into supported bus services, along with what we get from Welsh Government as well to support that. So it's really important that we actually look at that figure very carefully, because it's a large sum of money. And I think a lot of people would be quite amazed, really, about how much we actually do put in ourselves. And obviously these are the the non-commercial bus routes. So we've actually added in a 0.5%, which is now ring-fenced into that 6.7% increase. And that's really important, so that 0.5% will keep those bus services going. And that is actually ring-fenced, and I think that's a big and important decision for us as a council to make. And then alongside that is our commitment to our local bus services, and how we're still working very closely to secure then the necessary funding to keep our bus services operating in the Vale. And so we've still got further news around what other funding, will be announced in due course, if and when. And so we're still working towards that. Our officers are still working incredibly hard around that. And that is their commitment to our bus services and to our communities. So I just really wanted to highlight that and how important that is. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Yes, I think that our transport team deserve our thanks. Been huge negotiations ongoing with Welsh Government, and if we didn't have the finance available to match the funding we've been arguing for, then it wouldn't be forthcoming. So I hope we get some news soon.
Fingers crossed.
So we've got Mark. Did you want to come in?
I like to come in. First of all, I like to highlight certain things that have happened. I think it's very important to emphasise that we've received 3.1% from Welsh Government, but people got to remember that actually the UK government only sent Welsh Government an increase of 2.1%. So actually, if you look at those percentages, it's 50% more. It was 2.1, it's about 50% more increase we've had. And really, we're very grateful for that, because without that, if you imagine we only had an increase of 2.1%, we'd be looking, at more services we might need to review and look at. Now, obviously, it's been a very difficult process. These budgetary processes do take months of deliberation. There's an awful lot of hard work made by our finance and all our officers to look at all the different areas. And, and people got to appreciate that. And I also like to highlight in particular the on page 6, on the table 2, the next expenditure on paragraph 1.12, this really itemises what we spend our money on and what a lot of people don't always appreciate. Like, for instance, in the area that I'm responsible for, like waste and recycling, for example, only 3% of the entire budget is spent on that. And that's less than £10 million. Another area I'm responsible is highways, including lots of people talk about potholes. That's part of 6.8 million, which works out 2% of the budget, And if you think about our leisure parks and street cleansing, and you might have said bombing your supported bus services, we're talking at 2% of the budget. So an awful lot of the money is actually makes up of education and social services. That makes up 74% of the budget, you know, and these are very much areas that not everyone uses. They probably have used in their lifetime and might use social services later on in their lifetime, but an awful lot of people don't necessarily experience that. Yet we all contribute to that, and rightly so. So, you know, I think that gives a good context as to where we are. But I would also like to put it on paper that I'm very thankful for the officers and their hard work in my area and other areas to work towards this budget process, because it's not been very easy this year. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. No, and it's been very long. We've gone over and over and over various issues. Oh, sorry, Gwyn, I missed you. You wanted to come in.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, it has been a huge challenge this year, which, quite honestly, in my 25 years in May on this council, I have never faced before. Quite honestly, it is so difficult for all departments to meet. But, you know, all credit to the work that's been done with our Head of Finance, Matt Bomer, and Gemma, and all the team. They've come up with this after long discussions over 6 months with us. And it's really arrived at the day where we can say, well, okay, this is what we're going for. The challenges are still there. We're not going to run away this year and think that this is going to cover everything, because it's not. We're going to have to make savings in our services. But one thing, as Bronwyn has already said, you know, which I am pleased with, is saving the buses in the Western Vale particularly, because putting this money into the bus services means that people living out in the rural villages will have some form of transport. If this had not been put in, there would have been absolutely a huge difficult situation, because these people, some of them haven't got cars, particularly the older people. And I really feel for these people who are struggling. But at the same time, we've put this money in to help them with their bus service, which is absolutely great. Yes, it's going to be difficult for some people to pay this increase, but at the same time, I'm sure that we in our services will be, as we said on Monday night with the Housing Revenue account, we'll be there to help people with difficulties. So people have got to contact the council and we can go from there. Certainly it's a challenge, but we've got to appreciate that it's not just us, it's the whole of Wales, and some councils, which I'm reading about at the moment, are looking at things like 12%, 10%. I mean, I know RCT are really in double figures, I understand. So quite honestly, yes, it's been a huge battle, but all credit to everybody. And I mean, the hours that the officers have put into this, and obviously ourselves as cabinet members have constantly been looking at this over a long time in a number of meetings, scratching our heads and trying to think where we're going to save this, where we're going to cut this back or reduce this amount. And let's see what the consultation brings forth to us. But I don't think anyone can come better than this, than what we've got with our resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwyn. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we've got a monopoly on good ideas, and if there are other ideas, but I think that, you know, as we see, this is how we seek to achieve a balanced budget, and that is a requirement upon us, a legal requirement that we have to deliver a balanced budget. And I was speaking in the Senedd at a committee this morning, alongside other leaders, and you know, it is pretty daunting, I have to say, but you know, it's we will get through it, because we always do. So we've got a number of recommendations before us today, 5 in total, and so that's firstly that Cabinet notes the Council's updated financial position as set out in this report. 2, that Cabinet considers and approves the revised funding and spend assumptions, along with the draft savings proposals and refers this report and appendices to scrutiny committees for their consideration and debate, with all committees' views being referred for scrutiny at the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee, and for a composite response to be developed and referred back to a special cabinet on the 29th of February 2024. 3, that Cabinet approves the savings proposals as described in the body of this report and appendix to be published for consultation with the Vale Glamorgan residents and other groups impacted by the council's budget as described in the body of this report. And I hope that consultation will be live certainly by tomorrow, but maybe even later today. 4, that Cabinet notes the underlying level of financial pressures not included in the proposals, most notably fully funding pay awards and meeting the demands of providers in their annual uplifts. So we cannot meet all of those. And 5, that the use of the urgency procedure as set out at section 1514 of the Council's Constitution be agreed to refer the report to, as described in recommendation 2, for consideration as soon as possible. So that's rather than wait for potential call-in procedures, that this report will go on its journey to scrutinies, etc., for full consultation. And I would move.
And I'd like to second those recommendations, Leader.
Thank you. And we have no dissent, so that's agreed. Thank you. The second report ahead of us, we'll get my other notes up here, is the draft capital programme proposals 2024-25 to 2028-29. And this is to gain approval for the programme proposals so that they can be submitted to scrutiny committees for consultation prior to them being presented to members later in the year. So the report basically sets out the draft capital programme for I said, for the period from 2024 right through to 2029. On the 19th of December, as we heard earlier, the Welsh Government announced a provisional budget settlement which included the general capital settlement, or general capital funding settlement if you want to be specific. The amount awarded to the council is 6.986 million, and that's being made up of 3.54 million grant and 3.446 million of supported borrowing. This is actually, the reason I was so specific on that rather than rounding up is that this is a decrease of 11,000 from the 2023-24 general capital funding of 6.997 million. There hasn't been a further indication from Welsh Government. So it's been assumed that from 2025-26 onwards, the level of capital funding will basically stay the same, be flatlined at 6.986 million, and will remain constant for the remainder of the period of this programme. The report includes a summary of the 5-year capital programme and how it's funded, and the total value of the capital schemes over the next 5 years is 376.6 million. That includes 22.349 million for the Band B Sustainable Communities for Learning programme, 78.565 million for education pipeline schemes. So those are other education schemes that we're proposing to do, and 205.775 million for the housing improvement scheme, and that is quite an impressive sum in terms of housing improvement and building. The funding table also highlights the unsupported borrowing required to implement the programme, which is 160.7 million, of which slightly over 134 million is in relation to the housing improvement programme, and that detailed programme is in Appendix 1. Capital bids were requested to be returned by the 20th of October, and in total there were 47 bids from different directorates, and a summary of the capital bids over each directorate area is detailed in the report. In total, the capital bids over the 5 years totalled 56.8 million. The net bids after deducting any potential grant and possible Section 106 funding for the period totalled 56.5 million. In relation to 2024-25, the gross total of bids is 19.19 million. And after deducting Section 106 and specific grant, the net value is 18.899 million. If all of the available funding for 2024-25 of 6.49 million is used as detailed in the report, then we'd have a shortfall of 12.43 million. If the council borrowed to fund this shortfall, then the revenue cost associated with this borrowing would be £709,000 per annum over 40 years. And this would mean every £1 million of borrowing would have an impact of around 57,000 on the revenue budget. So this is where these are linked together, that we have to balance what we want to achieve in terms of capital, because in such difficult times of revenue budget, if we have borrowing costs, which could be £709,000 a year, that's an extra percent, not far off on council tax every year to pay for borrowing costs. Capital bids have been considered by the council's insight board and also the senior leadership team. So there was a sort of multi-directorate teams. And in order to be able to fund high priority bids that have been submitted, a further review of the capital programme has been undertaken. The risks associated with not progressing some of these high priority bids is significant. And there will be some opportunity costs associated with identifying this level of funding. It's considered that the risk associated with not identifying this funding could be more significant than the risk associated with some high cost schemes within the programme. And that, I suppose that typifies the types of balances that we're constantly having to do about what are the risks of trying to find funding for schemes versus not actually undertaking schemes. The schemes that are proposed to be removed from the capital programme are set out within Table 6 of the report. And as the provisional capital settlement from Welsh Government has now been received, it's proposed that the new schemes and additional pressures below are now included in the capital programme. The schemes are detailed in the report, but for 2024-25 include an extra £1.5 million schools asset renewal, £230,000 for works in residential homes, and that's things like boilers and stuff like that. An additional 1.550 million, so that's just over £1.5 million extra for resurfacing, road resurfacing. 150,000 to complete high-level glazing work at Penarth Leisure Centre, which I believe is going well and on track. And £2.5 million for the Penarth Marina landslip slope stabilisation works, and a further £2 million in 2025-26. £175,000 for tree planting and the cyclical maintenance of trees. £200,000 for Windsor Road retaining wall works. £100,000 for the household waste and recycling centre improvements in Llandau, and £64,000 for works to fire alarms in the Alps depot and in the civic offices. So where this is going next, the next steps that we've got are that scrutiny will be asked to review the draft capital programme and make any comments to Cabinet by 29th of February 2024. Managers will be asked to revisit the recommended schemes contained in the draft and the final proposals, and prior to presentation to Cabinet, and Council to confirm final costs and spend profiles. A consultation is due to be carried out with the community, which ends in mid-February, and the results of this will help to inform the final capital proposals that are going to come back to Cabinet in February. And the final settlement is due to be announced from Welsh Government in late February, early March, as we heard earlier. Currently, the approved timetable requires Cabinet to approve the final budget proposals by no later than 29th of February 2024, and the Cabinet's final capital programme proposals will be considered by Council at its meeting in March to enable the council tax to be set by the 11th of March. So the recommendations just make sure, are before us here, and this is again 5 recommendations. Is firstly that Cabinet reviews the draft capital programme for 2024-25 to 28-29 and submits the programme for consultation to all the scrutiny committees. Secondly, that any recommendations of scrutiny committees are passed to Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee as the lead scrutiny committee in order for their views to be forwarded to Cabinet. 3, that subject to recommendations 1 and 2, the increase in budget and reprofiling of Band B Iolo Morgannwg as set out in table 12 of this report be approved. 4, that subject to recommendations 1 and 2, the reprofiling of the housing improvement programme in line with the housing business plan as set out in table 16 of this report be approved. And finally, in order that it can get on its journey for consultation, etc., that the use of the urgency procedure as set out at section 1514 of the Council's Constitution be agreed to refer the report to scrutinies as described in recommendation 2 for consideration as soon as possible. And I'd move.
And I'll second those recommendations, Leader.
Thank you. And I don't see any hands up or any dissent, so that's agreed. Thank you. And then moving on to the report that I mentioned earlier, and this is reshaping the next phase of transformation. And it's interesting actually to look back on this, because this council has been doing variations. I mean, we've been dealing with challenging budgets, not to this level, but challenging budgets since 2010, and since 2015, we actually launched the original Reshaping Services programme. And in the original strategy, we looked at alternative ways of delivering services to provide better outcomes or more efficient means of delivery, to develop the council and its partners to ensure that we could meet future challenges. And actually, an awful lot of the strategy behind that was financial. And over the course of the 5 years, it was interesting to look back, because some of the things that happened since there that now we see as being fairly commonplace is that the creation of neighbourhood services happened, where we actually looked at the needs of communities and restructured at that point. The establishment of 5 community-run libraries, and there were hugely difficult conversations at that time, because at the end of the day, nobody likes change, but I think it's fair to say that the libraries are much better run by the communities, that there's some amazing work going on in our community libraries, that with even the budget restrictions that we had in those days, but not, we couldn't even countenance it in the current situation, we could not have delivered to that level. So with support from the council, we still provide peripatetic support and books, supplies and everything, but the communities have done an absolutely superb job. We've remodelled the functions within social services, and Big Fresh catering company was launched, and that was a whole new way of delivering services. Who, with a team that have done the council absolutely proud, have allowed us to save Penarth Pier Pavilion, have create sustainability for the new Bellevue Community Centre. They worked right the way through the pandemic, and are one of our sort of greatest successes. We've had a new relationship with our staff where we have series of big conversations. We have the staff charter so that staff hopefully understand not only what their role is, but what they can expect from the council. And, you know, more recently, we've had the culture book. I think we need to recognise, I mean, I'm talking about savings, but the backdrop of savings from 2010, 11 through to 2021 was £59 million in savings that have had to be taken out of the budget. So when you actually look at, you know, the proportion of our current budget that is, that it is a phenomenal amount. And that allowed the council to mitigate to some extent the impacts of austerity. So in 2021, the council looked at renewing, reshaping, and it was mindful of a review undertaken by Audit Wales and the council's recovery strategy coming out of the COVID pandemic. And there were three areas of challenge there that we looked at. And we looked at reshaping our community, and that was to look at whether or not we could work differently with our community and build on some of the amazing work that was done by our communities during the pandemic. Reshaping with our work and how do we function as an organisation? How do we deliver services that are fit for the future? And reshaping our resources. And so over the course of the last 2 years, those challenges have helped quite a number of things. And I think that some that are noticeable, and I mean, I've mentioned the Pier Pavilion, but that actually was in, well, actually, no, it's about 2021. The warm welcome schemes were a huge success. And they are showing us very much a way forward within our communities as well that we want to look at. And then the successes, it was a pilot project in Llantwit Major, the More Than Food project. And if we look at the way in which the community of Llantwit Major have really stepped up and run so many successful initiatives, alongside, and I have to say that the work of GVS, Morgan Voluntary Services, that operate out of CF61 down there. So over the course of the last 6 months, and alongside developing these budget proposals, we need to be transformational, and we need to be transformational in a way that is aligned with our need to deliver significant services. So this probably fits very well in that work is soon to commence on developing the council's new corporate plan for 2025 to 30. So we'll be starting to work on that now. Did you want to come in now, Mark?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to come in, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I just think this is a really interesting report, and I'm really delighted. I know we haven't got to the recommendations yet, but I'm really delighted that it's going to so many of our stakeholders here, because I do think the voluntary sector joint liaison committee is one of the umbrella organisations, umbrella bodies that we work with, and I think that's important that it's going there. I think it's really good that it's going to our unions through the Joint Consultative Forum, because I think they're very important stakeholders and they've got an interest. I also think it's great that it's going to our diversity networks and our equality consultative, because clearly, you know, the things that we have done so far and the things that we also want to have it input from them about their perspective. And as you rightly said, Leader, you know, we don't have a monopoly of ideas and initiatives. We get it from the community as well. And I think having representatives all different aspects of the communities, and also I can't forget obviously the Community Liaison Committee, which is the forum for town and community councils as well, which I know he's got his meeting tonight, although he won't come there yet, but he will come soon. It's another area where perhaps they can work with us on this to deliver these services. This is what I like to emphasise. This is not about getting rid of services. This is perhaps, as you rightly said, reshaping and changing them, to having a different view of them, and to see in which ways we can perhaps get it closer to the community, which has an impact. And I think, you know, there's certainly one in our ward, in Stanwell ward, isn't it, with the food pod, for instance. We've got fantastic voluntary group of people there working really hard to serve the local community of that particular area, and also the wider area as well. So there are some really good initiatives, you know, that we can do with reshaping. And I know that even with the work on Penarth Pier and the work there with various catering that we're doing there with Big Fresh, that's also helped out as well. And that's all about delivering it through different ways.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Mark. When we were talking about in the revenue budget, I mentioned there about the transformation agenda. So if you have a look at page 4 and on paragraph 2.2, it actually looks at the sort of framework for the transformation work, and that's got 5 interrelated themes. And as the target operating model, I'm just wondering if you know, 'cause it's being called the TOM, whether or not that's significant, but I'll have to ask him later. But the target operating model is what type of organisation do we want to be in terms of processes and people and how are we structured and the governance and you know, how do people find out stuff about what's going on? Because sometimes it feels, you know, how do people find information? So that's the way in which the overall strategy of the organisation will be delivered, and that's, you know, linked to the corporate plan. And it will take the objectives of the reshaping programme. We looked at service transformation, and that's, you know, how should services be delivered, and are there better ways of doing it? And you know, it's a bugbear of mine, but do we deliver some of our services as effectively as possible? And you know, could we help people's roles within the council to for them to be more enjoyable, to reach their full potential in terms of delivering their roles? Don't know, but actually we're only going to find out by talking about it, aren't we? Looking at you know, internal reorganisation, digital technology, that sort of thing. I look at the graphics of gritters going along roads in Scotland and being able to find out exactly which road you can go down. I'd love to do that here, but you know, we'll wait and see. Do it with rubbish lorries. And then a big one really for me is strengthening communities. That we should be an enabler and a facilitator in our communities, because most people actually just want to get on and do things. And so why aren't we helping them? Why aren't we enabling them to support their own communities? We saw it in the pandemic. We saw people doing amazing stuff. So how do we grasp that? How do we talk to people? And as I said, you know, if you look at community libraries, that was a perfect example. Digital innovation. How can we do stuff more effectively there? And by becoming increasingly digital, it actually frees up resource to those people that need additional help. So it's about working smarter. And then a big one is about data and insight. our decisions should be based on evidence. Our decisions should be based on exactly what is going on in our communities. And only by having that level of information will we be as effective as we want to. And we also need to increase the economic resilience of our communities. An area of focus within that is going to be the Council's response to the UK government's Levelling Up and Transforming Towns funding. Now, an awful lot of people have already said to me about, well, what about all this funding? You say, well, we haven't actually seen a penny of it yet, and we probably won't see a penny of it until next autumn at the earliest. But we need to be working in terms of that, and we need to be working on how ultimately that will impact on the Vale of Glamorgan and how we're going to make it work. So economic resilience will be quite a big one for us. So just get that. So it goes through in more depth about the different levels of it, which I'm sure we will discuss in greater length in scrutiny committees. But before us, we have... Sorry?
Could I just come in for the recommendations? Sorry.
You had a question.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yes, it's Deputy Leader. Do you want to come in?
Good, please. Okay, thank you. Sorry, yeah, I forgot to press my microphone.
Oh, you've got it.
I've done it now. Yeah. I suppose it's just to sort of highlight about where we've come around down this road of reshaping services. I remember being on Cabinet back then when we first mooted this idea, and initially it was like, how can we even do this? Where do we start? Was that at that point, because it was really a step into the unknown for the council and other councils to do all the work that we've had, and it's slowly evolved, and I think we actually did find a path then, and it's evolved and changed over those years. And I think things like the community libraries and the warm welcome scheme that we actually started, these community hubs have actually developed themselves in a way, and they've become an integral part of various communities, because each community is different and they might have slightly different wants and needs. And I do think that even though these are changes and they're physical changes, it actually deals an awful lot as well with social isolation. And I think that is so important for us. I think particularly post-pandemic, that's at the forefront of what we're trying to aim and what we're trying to do here as well. Because I think social isolation is incredibly damaging to people. And it impacts on health, it impacts on finances. And those support services that can be offered around those hubs is actually a lifeline for people. So, I'm absolutely delighted to see the work that we've done around that and how they've developed, and actually how communities have taken charge of that and actually thinking, well, do you know what, we'd like to do a bit more than this now, and they're asking about what else they can do and what are the services they can develop within those mini hubs almost, aren't they? So I'm absolutely delighted to see that work and actually about how we develop those sort of models now further into the future.
Yes, yeah, totally agree. I mean, and it can be, it can be quite complex arrangements between organisations, etc. Or it can be as simple as the council plants some trees and local people water them, which might seem incredibly simple, but watering those trees meant that they all survived through a hot summer. And it's just those sorts of simple conversations about, well, this area would be really nice rewilded.
Can I just come in on that? I know that the Penarth Fruit Tree Farm are doing quite a lot of that work already. And it'd be great that they do more, because obviously if you've seen the previous report we just looked at, we got an allocation of funding for more tree planting.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. Gwyn, did you have your hand up?
Yeah. On reshaping, I just wanted to mention, Leader, that we've got a number of schemes coming through the system. I'm hoping to have 3 or 4 of these within the next 6 weeks. But certainly, there are pluses and minuses with these. 1 or 2 people tend to be difficult, where the others are very keen. And the difficult ones sometimes want to take over everything, which they can't do because there's public access to those pieces of land, which you can't take away from the public, which is their entitlement. So there's a lot of work to be done with this, obviously, and it depends on whether the club or whoever it is will take over the part that they can have, but they can't have it all. So there's lots of discussions with 1 or 2, but the rest of them come along very promising, particularly in the Western Vale.
Yeah.
So hopefully, I'm really looking forward to this, because I know that we've got a cricket club, a football club in the Western Vale, and the cricket club, in fact, has put a huge amount into their facility. It's a private facility, but they want to work generally with the public. They want the community use of their facility, which is great to see, because sometimes you get private clubs do not want the community involved. But this particular club are very keen to bring a community in to use their facilities. So I think this is a way of working, particularly with the communities and with the town and community councils. And of course, the pluses about this as well is that when there's S106 funding available, and it depends on the criteria of the 106 funding, whether that could be used or not. But certainly there's other ways of getting funding. And of course, town community councils can add it onto their precept if they want to take that amount of land over for a 99-year period.
Yeah. No, agree. And you know, some people are more keen at the outset than others. But I think what this is saying is that we will work with anyone, and we will work to find a way.
Yes, certainly. And I think the trust makes a big difference to this, basically, because when you go to the Fields in Trust, they can guarantee these facilities, so they will contribute to these facilities and keep them community spaces, which is huge, for a period of 100 years.
Yes.
Which we won't see after that.
Yeah, I won't see that. But so no, I think that we're in agreement on that. So as I said, I've got 4 recommendations here today, and it's recommended that Cabinet considers and notes the content of this report. Secondly, it's recommended that Cabinet approves the proposals for developing the next phase of the Council's transformation change programme, reshaping, as set out in this report. 3, that it's recommended that Cabinet refers this report to Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee, Joint Consultative Forum, Voluntary Sector Joint Liaison Committee, Community Liaison Committee, the Public Services Board, the Regional Partnership Board, the Council's Diversity Networks, and the Equalities Consultative Forum for their consideration, and that any views are shared with the Chief Executive and reported to Cabinet in due course. And finally, it's recommended that Cabinet receives further updates on the reshaping programme as it develops in parallel with the Council's work on the new corporate plan and medium-term financial strategy. And I'd move.
And I'll second those recommendations, Leader.
Super. That's good. I'm starting to lose my voice there. So I'm pleased to be moving on to the report of the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood and Building Services. It's an update report on recycling and waste management service changes 2023-24. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Leader. I'm delighted to present this report. This report is a very detailed one, and I go to lots and lots of different areas. The first area I really want to go into is our green waste service. Now, as you know, last year it was introduced in the summer of last year, and we introduced a scheme whereby we have basically two different services here in terms of the level of the amount that people can actually collect. So up to green, we had basically the first one was 8 green bags. Okay, so there's a capacity of what we call 480 litres. And this is the only, basically in this situation, up to 8 green bags was, really, really good, because it meant that an awful lot of people could actually support up to 8 green bags, smaller gardens. And then obviously for large gardens, anything over 8, it was what we call unlimited. And we're the only authority in Wales, if not the UK, well, I need to fact check that, and not the UK to offer that service, which is absolutely fantastic. And it's ideal for people in very large gardens, for instance, who may take, a considerable time to do that. But of course, it also helps our tonnages as well. The other point I would also point out here is that this helps towards our statutory recycling targets, and obviously meets our tonnage minimum requirements. And also we work with Cardiff City Council for the organics treatment of that. Now, obviously, as part of this, we had an income target of £500,000, which is based on a combination of a couple of factors. First of all, charging for the current service and reduce the amount of current resources. And to achieve this, the subscription service was reduced by 1 vehicle along with reduction in associated agency staff, and our subscription target of 10,000 households was set based on a forecast of 20% of residents. The great news, though, is that we've actually exceeded that target by 1,577 subscribers as of the last week of November 2023. Of those people that used it, and I was very delighted to know that a lot of people in the Vale Glamorgan are tech savvy, in the sense that 8,894 of them used the online service, which is really, really beneficial. And of the £30 subscription, that was the higher one, that's for people with unlimited recycling. That was almost 80% of those 1,058 used the self-service online, and that generated an income for the Vale of £262,880. But if you look at over a whole year, that worked out for the full year, if we projected it for a whole year, of savings of £473,000. That meant that we almost met our target of £500,000. Now, I consider that to be a great result. Okay, admittedly, we didn't achieve it, but if you get rid of 95% of your target, you pretty much achieved it. And you've got to remember that in the previous year, we did have some major challenges with some of the staffing because, as you know, thanks to the cost of living crisis, we had to then increase the pay of those drivers. So we didn't really have the problems that we had the year before. Now, the important bit here is that going forward on this, that we also need to consider here that in the future, we need to remember that we want people to pay fairly quickly. We don't want a situation where people are paying later on in the year. For one thing, obviously, by paying earlier, the residents of the Vale Glamorgan will enjoy a service from the beginning of March. They will have the full nine months of the service from March till November, which would be terrific. And then it'll be winning requests from November till February. And clearly that's something that we want. Now, you've got to remember that last year, people didn't pay as much as they will do this year because they didn't have the whole year's benefit of it. So last year, they paid £20 for up to 8 green bags and 30 beyond. Now, this year, they're going to be paying £36 for up to 8 green bags and £54 for the whole year. But that actually equates to no increase because you've got to work it out on the use of the service over the year. It only works out roughly about £2 per collection. And that's what people have got to realise, that in fact, I think it's even less than that in fact, there's going to be no increase in any charge at all this year. I'm now going to go on to our waste targets. Now, in 22-23, as you probably remember, as I did mention it before, that actually, because of the fact that we had issues with our drivers because of the cost of living crisis and the pay, and we had to temporarily suspend some of our green waste collection services in the summer of 2022. Our actually recycling performance slightly dropped slightly from 70.2% to 16.7%. Okay, so what we got, remember, of course, where we had that particular issue. But this year, I'm pleased to say to you that for 23-24, the count rate is now back to 70.25%. And I will thank you for the residents of Earl Glamorgan for obviously using the green waste service. And if you look on table 1 on page 7, which is very interesting report, an interesting table, you will see actually the amount of volume of green waste collected in many months of this year was more than we collected in the previous year, even though in the previous year we offered a free service, which just shows to me that demand for green waste is obviously, is there, very much so for the green waste service. The residents of Earl Glamorgan greatly appreciate its needs. And, we're delighted to continue to offer it. What I would like to emphasise, this is not a statutory service. We do not have to provide it, but we do it for the convenience of our Earl Glamorgan residents, and I think that is something that I would like to very much emphasise. The other part of this report is the changes that we are going to make, not just to green waste, I've just mentioned those, but also to flats. Now, one of the challenges that we have with flats is that many of the flats, the residual waste is collected every 2 weeks instead of every 3 weeks. Now, we want a consistency of approach, that's one thing, but also I am very concerned that there is not enough recycling going on in flats. Now, some people take advantage and use their initiative, and some people may not be aware, and let's be honest about it, about something called quad bags. And I think if people use quad bags in flats, that'd be a great advantage for them. And quad bags are free to use. You can get them from libraries. You can apply for them online as well. And I would emphasize to people, if you've got limited space, use a quad bag. They're brilliant. And you can divide it into all the separated areas. And I think that's something that we really need to encourage more people to recycle. Because I'm afraid that still in lots of areas where there is flats, there's still too much residual waste generated. That basically means black bags. And we really need those people instead to use the separation service. And I think quad bags are the way to go. I also think that a lot of people perhaps think about this actually needs to go in a black bag, and I say actually it doesn't. Like an example with some of the hard plastics, some people think out there, but because it's not entirely white, it has to go into the black bag. No, it's not true. But what we do encourage people is to clean it. So if you've got a dishwasher, or even just put a bit of water over it just to clean it out, okay? Because you've got to think about our operatives as well, not just actually collecting it, but also our household recycling facility, or waste recycling facility, in Atlantic Trading Estate. You've got to think about their welfare as well here. So it's important, that we do want to work with landlords, our external partners here on this, and we will want to introduce this service. The other thing I also like to mention is some of the new developments in terms of recycling. We have introduced small electrical items, which we use the word or use the acronym WE. I know we associate with WE with something else, but I'm not going to go there on that. But also the other thing that we also recycle at the moment is batteries as well. And the other thing we're looking to do at a latter part of this year is, I know some people have got this habit, and that's using vapes. And in the future, at the latter part of this year, you'll be able to put in your discarded vapes into the batteries operations. And what I like people to appreciate is the tonnages. If you look on table 3 on page 13, for example, at the moment, we have collected up until the end of October, 30 tonnes. 30 tonnes that could have gone into landfill, in other places. It's now going to be recycled and reused. And I think that's absolutely terrific. What I also like to go into is some of the initiatives that we are doing. Now, a lot of people may be aware, and hopefully more people will be aware, of our reuse shop. And that's on page 16 of the report. And the fantastic facility there. And I think it's really important that if you use the shop, it's run by Emphasis Foundation. And basically they operate a shop and they operate by volunteers. And really, if you go there, have a look around, you'll probably find something you want to buy. But of course, if you want to donate it, either there or at the neighbouring facility, at the household recycling facility, please do, because it's important that we can reuse things. It's a really good thing to do. The other thing I've been very delighted to visit over the last year, and I will continue to do so as Cabinet member, is our superb resource recycling facility. And actually, I know that some of us have posted videos, and I know the leader has posted videos of it, and I know that other people have, and you can see the baling processes that go on in terms of separation. Because I want to assure people out there that when things are actually separated, they really are going to these centres to be reprocessed and reused. And, it's important, but also it earns the council quite a lot of money as well. The amount of money we get from especially glass has been doing rather well, and aluminium is another one as well. So it's important that people realise that that facility, well, I think is probably set to lead in. And I know I've had visitors from other councils look rather envious of what we offer there. And I think it's a really good initiative. Other things I also highlight is that we are starting to work with improving the road surfacing in Clandale. That's happening, and it's been happening, and it will continue to happen, and it will to improve the place. I know we've had a number of complaints over the years. We want that place to be more accessible and for the people in the Western Vale to use that facility. And we're working on a lease for that site, and that work is progressing. We also got various initiatives that Welsh Government have also introduced as well, or introducing, I should say. One of the things that you probably are aware of at the moment is single-use plastics. Welsh Government has introduced legislation which basically has banned single-use plastics, and that includes things like plastic plates, plastic cutlery, plastic drink stirrers, single-use plastic balloon sticks. And by the phase 2, we're looking at things like carrier bags with some exemptions, polystyrene lids for cups and takeaway containers. And what I'm trying to encourage people, if people do go to a coffee shop, trying to bring their own container and therefore get it reused rather than keep using, ones made of paper. Because ultimately, if they are being paper, they will end up in a black bag. They will not end up being, because they're contaminated. And it's important that people understand that. And the other thing that's going to be a big change from April this year is the recycling network regulations. Now, at the moment, as you and I know, we're part of what we call the blueprint, which is the technical jargon for separation at recycling at home. So from April this year, in the workplace, you'd be expected to separate your recycling in the workplace. Now, I know that many places are starting to do that already in preparation for that. But I would encourage anyone who's a commercial property to actually to contact Shared Regulatory Services if you're unsure what you need to do. I know many of them have received letters. I've seen a copy of the letter myself. And if they need help, please do. Obviously, you cannot ignore it. It's a statutory regulation, but obviously we want to engage with people. We're not in the business of finding people left, right and centre. You know, we're in the business of helping people and understand how to do things. And I think that's important. Further on, there is also another initiative, something that I'm very supportive of, is the Extended Producer Responsibility for Packaging Scheme, EPR. I know it's been delayed a bit, but really, I think there's a lot of commercial providers perhaps generate an awful lot of packaging, and is it really needed? Question mark. And I think this is something that if they generate it, you know, Welsh Government, you know, is looking for them to pay, and it's something that obviously they need to work with. But fundamentally, we want to reduce the amount of packaging. You know, another things I know which has been tried out in other places in the UK is deposit return scheme. Now, I remember as a little boy, that's a few years back, mind you now, going to the local shop and returning lemonade bottles. And I think I used to get a shilling or 5 pence in new money. 5 pence. I think in the old days it might have been a sixpence. When my dad used to talk about it, he used to talk about sixpence or even a threepenny bit, the old silver threepenny bits, you know. Okay. And, you know, bringing back these schemes, but it's not just going to be for glass, it's also going to be for plastics as well, because I think one of the issues that we have, we still see too much plastic bottles around. And admittedly, most of them are recycled, which is really good. But if we can have less of them and being processed from the source, I think that's a really good thing to happen as well. So what I'd like to go to now is the recommendations. Okay. Did you want to come in, Leader?
I was only going to mention, because I'd already ringed it to mention, but you got there first.
Sorry.
I was quite interested, was the stuff about the small electricals, because I saw some stuff online, I'm not sure where it was, saying that there are discussions about the potential to introduce it into England. And I thought, but we've already been doing it.
Is that it?
And it actually demonstrates that we've taken, 21 tons of small electricals out of the potential waste stream, and collected it from people's doors. So I think that's an absolutely phenomenal effort. So I just wanted to recognise that.
And the batteries, I think that's
batteries are really good.
fantastic. I love it. Yeah.
Although you can't put lithium ones in. You have to go down to the Household Waste and Recycling Centre for those. But anyway, never mind. I'm sorry for interrupting, Mark. I'll leave you to it.
That's fine. I was just going to you made some good points there. I'm just going to come in and get Gwyn to come in as well after. We're talking about the Prime Minister talking about, plastic bags and everything like that. But Wales did this years before anywhere else, really. And other countries are now following us. And although that's really good that we're doing it first, but sometimes UK government likes to pretend that they've done it before us, really. And they're copying us ideas, which is very typical of them. So you're absolutely right. So I know, Gwyn, you want to say something.
Well, Leader, I'd like to congratulate Mark. It's an excellent report. And the officers, Colin Smith and his staff, they've done a tremendous report. I was very interested here that we talked about the green bags and the costs and everything. Well, if I just worked out a couple of figures, which Mark told us about today, if, for example, you were having 8 bags, each collection would really cost for those 8 bags £1.80, and each bag is 22.5p. With regard to any amount, well, let's just take a neighbour of mine who sends out about 20 bags per time. 20 bags per time would cost her £2.70, but she can send out more. I mean, I've seen her put out 30 before now. And, I mean, you're talking about 13.5p a bag. And they're big bags. They're the original bags that we used to use, So, I mean, it's a very good service. If you were trying to get rid of your waste yourself, it would cost you a lot more and a lot more time, because you'd have to take them to the nearest centre or somewhere. And where would you take them, apart from fly tipping them? But I mean, quite honestly, it's an excellent service that we provide. And I know that in the past, Bridgend used to dump their bags down into St. Bride's to try and save paying Bridgend County Borough £40 at the time for collection of bags. But we soon quickly got out onto them because they were a different colour bag from ours. But certainly, there's a lot of initiatives in this report for the future. And Mark, I used to collect lemonade bottles. That was my money every week. So I used to love doing that. Anyway, thank you very much. Cheers.
Okay, it's not just lemonade bottles. It used to be cream soda and cherryade as well, I remember. And even limeade if I was very lucky. Okay. Okay. All right, then. Going back to the recommendations now. Okay. So we got 4 recommendations. First of all, that... Sorry. I know we've got 8 recommendations. I just realised. Apologies. Apologies. I'll get to it in a moment. That's right. Don't worry. It's on page 2. It's all right. All right. We've got 8 recommendations. Apologies for that. First of all, number 1, that the Cabinet notes the current waste service performance since implementation of July 2023 service charges. That Cabinet approves the annual subscription charge of £36 for up to 8 bags and £54 for unlimited quantity for 24-25 on a frequency of once per fortnight between March and November, and on the Wing and Request service on a first-come, first-service basis between December and February for subscribers of the service. Number 3, that Cabinet approves in principle to introduce free weekly black bag collections for flats and apartments from March 2024. That Cabinet notes the update on new and pending waste legislation changes. That Cabinet notes the infrastructure update. That the urgency procedure set out at section 15.14 of the Council's Constitution be used in respect of recommendation 2, that's in relation to the service charges, and that Cabinet refers this report to the Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee for its consideration, and with any views and recommendations referred to Cabinet for consideration. And finally, that recommendation 3, that's to do with the free weekly black bags for flats and apartments from March 2024, be considered as approved should no views to the contrary be expressed by the Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee. And I so move.
Thanks, Mark. Gwyn, did you want to come in? So, hang on, I'll switch this off so you can...
Yeah, I'm happy to second that, Leader. Having been a previous Cabinet member for waste management, I'm absolutely delighted the way we're progressing.
Super. So there's no dissent to that. Gwyn's seconded it. That's super. So we'll take that forward. Thank you, Mark. So that brings us to the end of today's agenda. I don't have any urgent items or part 2 items. So I'm looking at, I haven't. That's good. And so if I can, as I said, close the meeting and thank everybody for their attendance. And if the Democratic Services officers could confirm